Today, as I'm sure you're aware, Identiverse likes to save the most exciting topics for Friday morning to get everyone pumped up and here. So appreciate you all being here. That's why I'm excited to talk to you today about quality identity, which makes the world go round. So this was originally supposed to be, I was going to have my colleague Amanda Kane with me presenting as well. Unfortunately, she came down with something and wasn't able to make the conference, so I'm on my own today, but as they say, the show must go on. So, by way of introduction, let me draw your attention to the next slide here. You will see that my name is Caleb Frazee. I'm a director with Guidehouse, and oh no. Oh man, can't believe this. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Seems I have a data quality issue. Somehow, Amanda's portrait here has gotten associated with my identity data. I don't know how this could have happened. It obviously has nothing to do with setup for this presentation. But it's okay. It's fine. It's just a PowerPoint, and I'm obviously here in person to correct the mistake. But what would happen if I wasn't here, or what would happen if this identity data were in your identity management system? And what happens when identity data like this is fed into the advanced solutions that we're all putting in place to govern access policies? What happens when this is fed into all of the automatic policies that we've built to take action without human intervention? So that's what I want to talk to you about today. A couple days ago, I got to listen to John Pritchard speak in his keynote, and he laid out a pyramid that had data at the foundation, and then built upon that to include knowledge, intelligence, and automation. So today, this presentation is going to zoom in on that foundational level of data, and specifically quality data and identity hygiene. So first, let's start with a little simple definition of identity hygiene, and specifically identity management hygiene, which I'm defining as a combination of tools, processes, and policies that enhance the quality of identity data. And in a minute here, we're going to elaborate on those tools, processes, and policies, and talk about questions that we should be asking ourselves as we look across our organizations at our data to make sure that it is of the quality that we want. Before we get there, though, let's talk a little bit more about some common challenges that we all face. So number one here on the list, complex identity systems. We're all continuing to add new identity technology, and with that, data continues to grow. And it also moves across the organization. So each system we add needs to consume the data. As data moves, it's sometimes transformed across systems. So I'll give an example of a integration we saw where the authoritative database had the correct information. A downstream database that it flowed into had, for a specific field, had a cutoff of 20 characters. So what happened when the value went into that database? Well, only 20 characters survived the transition. Unfortunately, that database was responsible for printing credentials, and that value was printed on access cards and only showed the 20 characters. And there were also implications of other downstream systems that leveraged that value to make access control decisions. And so obviously not an ideal situation there. Part of these complex identity are hybrid environments, right? We've got on-prem, we've got in the cloud, we've got legacy systems, 20 plus years old. These store and manage data in different ways using legacy means, and often are difficult to, or can be difficult to modernize. The second challenge I want to talk about is the at least perceived commercial imperative. And what I mean by that is, does the organization actually need the data that they are collecting, all of the data they are collecting, or are they, is it just a perception of the need? Are we saying, well, let's collect that value because we might need it down the line? And what this does is continue to build the collection of data that we're collecting and making it harder to manage due to size and volume. So the third thing on here, the varying degrees of quality of the data. Hand jamming data, we've all seen, I'm sure, legacy systems or maybe modern systems where there are still values that are entered manually by hand. So what do you do when you come across a attribute that is entered 20 different ways in the system, and how are we going to build access policies that to when we don't have kind of the standardized values there? And some of these systems, so we've seen systems that have, I said 20 plus values, but then there's other times when an attribute is essentially not usable at all because it's been entered thousands of different ways because every user's entering it differently. So that's a real challenge here. And then the last one is the strong security requirements. We obviously want strong security. That's what we are all about to champion here. But balancing things like data masking, encryption, making sure the data is secure, privacy implications with cleaning data and managing data effectively. So all of those challenges that kind of across organizations, right? So what are we going to do about it? How do you get to higher quality identity data? I would like to propose 4 considerations that organizations should consider as we're looking at this. Data retention policies, identifying and assessing the data, automation, and continual analysis and monitoring. You will see it is intentionally in a cycle here because this is not a one and done process, but a continual process. So data retention policies. This one, how long is an organization going to store and manage data, right? Different types of data are governed by different regulations. And so step 1 is identifying what are those regulations that my data are subject to. If it's, there might be HIPAA regulations that your organization needs to follow. The federal government has NARA regulations they need to follow. But it's not kind of one across the board. Different types of data are subject to these different retention policies. And so first understanding what your organization's policies, data retention policies need to be. But related to that, I guess the second aspect to once you've defined what they need to be, is actually implementing those within your systems, within technology. And I think this is the biggest area that I have seen where we tend to fail, right, is we might know, okay, I need to keep this attribute for 7 years, but what inevitably ends up happening is we get a new system, we're very excited to integrate it into our larger architecture, we're very excited to get data into it, we're very excited to get things moving, and data retention, yeah, we know we've got 7 years, so we're going to kick that can down the road for now and worry about it later. Problem is, 10 years later, we still haven't implemented any kind of purging to get rid of those, rid of data that we no longer need, and we're just continuing to fill up our systems with data that we don't need, and also if it's customer data, we're putting that just at risk, holding on to that. And then there's cost implications as well, obviously, to that. So taking a hard look at data retention policies and the technology that we're going to use to implement it. If it's a new system, maybe it has a built-in method of purging records. If it doesn't, looking at other tools that can support there. Another aspect to this is data retention across your whole identity solution. So we often tend to look at this on a system-by-system basis, which we do need to look at it in that, but we also know as data is traveling across the organization, even if there's an authoritative database over here, there may at times be, those attributes may have migrated elsewhere and are now written to other systems. And so it's making sure that as we inactivate or remove data in one place, that it's actually carrying across to all of the downstream systems as well. All right, and that brings us to identify and assess your identity data. So how is, I guess first question, what attributes do I actually need to create an identity record? What attributes am I using to, or want to use for my access policies? That'll help inform what needs to go into that identity record. And taking a hard look, and this can be pretty challenging because as we migrate kind of from more traditional group-based or RBAC approaches into more attribute-based and contextual models, it really requires conversations with business operators and system owners and kind of across the whole organization to define what attributes does an identity truly need to access resource A, right? So it can be, in my experience talking with people, this can be a challenging jump to make because inevitably you talk to the system owner and they say, well, they're in this group, that's why they have access, right? Or they're in IT, and so they need access to this suite of applications. And it's pushing beyond that to truly identify those attributes that we're going to be making decisions on. So once we've identified, hey, this is the group of attributes that we need to build our database, then we need to assess where are we going to get that data from, right? Like, what is the authoritative source that we're going to use for that specific attribute? In that, as you're looking at that and trying to make those determinations, it's important to look at where that attribute is validated. I think that sometimes there are instances where an attribute may come in from a specific venue, specific system, but it might be self-attested, hasn't actually been validated. If we're going to use that to make decisions, then we should probably do some validation on there. And so making sure that we understand. There's other times that you have attributes coming in from multiple places, right? And you have to ask yourself which source is authoritative for this value and should take precedent in my identity record. So then third question, after we've identified those, is what mechanisms do I have to standardize how this data is being captured and managed? And then finally, how are we consider how the data is going to move across the enterprise? So we found we got a case study here. We found an example with a law enforcement organization that had a bunch of inconsistencies and across data. One of the examples was the phrase or the country, the United States of America, was represented 16 different ways in one of their authoritative databases. And so they were able to establish a new data model and apply that and kind of do some cleanup on that field and standardize across how they were going to refer to the United States of America. All right, and that leads us to automation, or automate. And I'm specifically talking about automating the data cleanup activities and implementation of data standardization across the organization. There are a bunch of tools out there, both open source and ones you can procure that will help with this. And I think looking at what meets your needs, kind of identifying what your needs are, how much cleanup you need, and how complicated your systems are, what types of systems you have. The typical things you would be doing when you're looking at solutions that are out there are important in this. This can be as simple as scripts, right? It doesn't have to be, hey, go buy this tool. Like I said, there's open source. It could be writing scripts to help with this. But the reality is there's so much data in all of our organizations that it's going to be, at least for most businesses nowadays, that it's a very difficult task to do manually. And so we all need help. Let's leverage the technology. And in the case study here, there was a financial service agency who they did establish a new data model and used scripts in lieu of kind of manual cleanup to help with that. And that brings us continued analysis and monitoring. As I said, this needs to be continual. You're going to get new attributes, new data coming in your systems. And so putting the policies in place, the processes in place up front to define what you're going to do when that new data comes in. How are you going to standardize it? If you have a data model, and I would encourage you to have one, kind of across your organization, then that will help define this. But not, what you don't want to do is view this as a one-time effort, and then 6 months later you're back in the same place, needing to start from zero. So what can you do to put the policies and processes in place to support this? And again, with the tools can help as they kind of enforce validation rules. You can build business rules that say, like, this is what these fields, what the requirements are for the field. And then which systems will be authoritative for new attributes as they come in as well. All right, so, I forgot to mention account certifications can help here. There are a tool, like an IGA tool that does account certifications. If you're already doing that, you can leverage those certifications to do some data review as well at that time. Realizing the benefits of quality identity data. So we have done this, right? We've run through all these steps, and just a little bit of recap here. But what are we going to get out of it? Well, it's going to increase the confidence that we have in our identity data, and along with that, it's going to help us control our access management decisions as we have that clean data that we're of high quality. We will have an enhanced cybersecurity posture because we will have gotten rid of data that was just sitting there. We will have more visibility into our data, and we will have greater compliance with standards and policies, including security and privacy standards. These are also benefits. It will decrease database sizes, and so that's less to manage and maintain. Decrease data processing times, and decrease licensing costs. So overall, this decreases the cost to us to manage and maintain this data. All right, and with that, in the spirit of Identiverse, I will conclude saying that data is the fuel that powers our identity engines. So let's make sure we're putting clean data into those engines. Thank you.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions. Please raise your hand. We'll bring you a mic.
In your experience, when you're working with organizations and data retention policies tend to be not the highest priorities, right? For, as you mentioned, what kind of strategies have worked to influence the product roadmap and the C-suite to this matters and we should invest in it? Mm-hmm. If you have any examples to share.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think outlining the benefits, kind of like this deck, right, is if you go in at that last slide, you're telling them, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to decrease the cost to you, depending on the stakeholder. We're going to increase security, where we've got a lot of data out there that maybe is unmanaged data or we haven't looked at, and there's security risks there if we're talking to a CISO. So, approaching them from their perspective, but highlighting what's important and to them, and then how the effort's going to help address that. And I think the cost aspect is probably something that they're not necessarily thinking of, and so if you can highlight that for them, that's obviously helpful. In the long run, there might be a cost offset there. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. What do you think of retention and deletion versus the concept of reusable identity? Particularly because two common use cases for me are rehire and employee lifecycle, or former employees needing to log in. So we always have to keep those identities in perpetuity.
No, that is a great question, and I know I am all about reusable identity. Let me start with that for Christine's sake. And that's exactly where we want to go with it. But there's also, I guess it depends a lot on use case, right? And if data is being used, then it's not, like when we talk about purging records, it's not that from the time they're collected, it's from the time that they stop being used. And so, like if a record goes inactive or something, the person's not using it and it's been sitting for 7 years, or depending on the regulation. And so I think there is a balance to be struck there. If an identity hasn't been used in 7+ years, like, do you hang on to it, or do you make them go through the process again to reestablish or revalidate? I think the other thing to ask is, or to consider is archival. I think at some point, rather than, and I didn't get into this, but you can look at there's purging records and then there's archiving records, obviously, two different things. And so in archival, I'm not suggesting archival instead of purging, to be clear, but looking at that as an option as well. Mm. Yes.
Thank you. Great presentation. So my question is around different regions have different practices. So what I've noticed in my experience is a lot of rubber stamping happens when we go through the notion of user access recertification, to the extent that some of the dormant users get recertified as needing access who've not even logged in. Do you have any advice from other clients, how you've even been able to navigate that situation and kind of working with the different data owners to truly agree to purge them? Because they don't have any visibility, but they want to keep it because they don't know what could break, right, if they didn't. Yeah, no, it is definitely a challenge.
I think automation can help there with and greater visibility into exactly what is going on with those accounts. I have seen some, I'll say, more user-friendly interfaces that highlight not just like, hey, should this account be purged, but maybe why it should be, like the kind of behind, like why it's recommended that, hey, purge this account, or this account has been inactive for however long, it isn't used. So that's something to consider. And the other thing is just, I guess, goes education, like working with these people to educate them on the risks of not taking the certification job seriously. Definitely puts the organization at risk and their system. And so, unfortunately, at least if anyone else has insight, I'd love to hear it. But I don't have an easy answer to that question. It definitely is work to engage those stakeholders and kind of do that education piece to get them to prioritize it.
Okay, we are at time. Caleb, thank you very much for this excellent presentation.
Thank
Great
you all.
information. Best wishes to Amanda, and thank you all for your engagement today. Enjoy the rest of the show.